You are listening to Waterloo Underground with Johnny and with Miriam, and who am I? I'm garypiggold. I'm from the Pigpaper. I'm from the Loved Ones. I like the Kinks. You like the Kinks. We all love the Kinks. And you know what? Don't tell anybody, but you know that Kinks reunion? It's actually going to happen. So I can't talk much longer because I got to go to the airport and pick them up. Say no more, but stay tuned.
Greetings, Waterloo Undergrounders. You're listening to Waterloo Underground with your hosts,
Johnny
and Miriam. And today we have a very, very special guest from north of the border. That's right, we have garypiggold, who is known for so many things, including the Pigpaper and being one of the original Kinks fans from Canada. Oh yes, Canada, that wonderful land in the Great White North. Gary, please say hello to the Waterloo Underground crowd.
Now, wait a minute. Aren't you from Canada, too?
Shh.
Okay, yeah.
I'm from parts unknown.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I'm from Canada with a K. I'm sitting here looking out my window, and it's snowing right now, so I'm definitely in Canada. Where are you?
Well, we're actually here a little bit south of your border, and we're having a tremendous snowstorm, too. I think it's happening all over the place, along with all other catastrophes that might be going on. One bright spot, though, is speaking with you, Gary, up there, and I'm so glad that we made the connection here, and we want to know all about you. Who are you? Where did you come from? We know you're up there, but you're one of the kings of Kinkdom. How did that all happen? What happened to a little tiny little Gary Piglet when he arrived on this planet and began his life of Kinkdom?
Well, I used to listen to CHUM 1050 Toronto. Right, there you go.
Yeah.
And they were very good at playing the Kinks, not just the first two or three hits like you guys down south, but Phono Disc, which is out of Scarborough, Ontario, pressed for Pi in Canada. So we not only got most of the same releases they did in the UK at the time, but they actually promoted them and actually put them on the radio.
Uh-huh.
So I was listening to, Well-Respected Man. That was a big hit in Toronto. I loved Victoria. I can definitely remember hearing that when it first came out. But I will admit that I liked Herman's Hermit's version of Dandy much, much more than the Kinks.
Well, we won't get into that debate because it could be hotly contested on this end.
Well, understandably so, yeah. But the Kinks version would come in number 2, absolutely.
Okay. We won't hold that against you, Gary. So who was the big disc jockey there at CHUM for you? Do you remember some of the good names there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my favorite guy was Jungo J. Nelson, who had the morning slot, and he was amazing. I mean, long before Howard Stern or Nardwuar or any of these icons, he would be cold calling people on the phone early in the morning and saying, "There's a flying saucer hovering over your house," and it was an amazing show.
Wow.
There's no way they could get away with that stuff nowadays. But he not only did that kind of stuff, but he played, really good music, as most of the jocks on CHUM did. I mean, the CHUM charts, which were the weekly top 50 surveys, that's what we used when I would drag my mom and dad into the local record store and ask for a certain record. You would go by the number that it made on the CHUM chart that week.
Wow.
So
Okay.
CHUM was very, very, very important, very important.
Yeah. Were you getting
Although I
any
will say one caveat with a K, though. They refused to play the Rolling Stones all during 1964.
Really?
Why is that?
Well, because they didn't wash their hair and they didn't wear matching suits.
Oh,
and,
right. Okay, sure.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
it wasn't until... Miriam, you must be aware of Gary Top, the promoter, right?
Not really, no.
Okay, well, he's like a legendary guy around here, brought the Ramones to town, et cetera, et cetera. But back in the day, he was running the first Canadian Rolling Stones fan club. And he gave me years ago photocopies of all these letters from the program director at CHUM stating why they couldn't play the Rolling Stones. It's amazing. Until, of course, Satisfaction came along and they had no choice. But
Wow. Well, just as an aside, what Canadian stations were the first to really push the Stones? Because my brother was such a Stones fanatic, you know? I mean, he went from the Beatles to the Stones heavy duty and stayed with the Stones to this day. You know, he's had to see
it was
them on every tour.
CKOC in Hamilton, which was the cool station because Hamilton is the cool city.
Okay.
Look
Of
at all the
course.
amazing bands that have come, you know, Teenagehead, Simply
Of
Saucer,
course.
Forgotten Rebels, you know.
Yeah.
So they were playing the Stones right off the bat, starting with It's All Over Now. You know, those were all hits. But in Toronto, we had to wait a year.
Wow. Okay, but thankfully, they were not having that kind of dirty hair argument with the Kinks, were they?
No, I think that was the musicians' union in the States had the issues with the Kinks, but,
Yeah, they
but
sure
not
did.
CHUM.
And it was over more than just long locks.
So I hear.
So, Gary, you were a young fellow, and we've been able to discern that you were hatched in Hamilton. Is that true?
No, actually, I was born in Toronto, lived in the suburbs. I'm actually back in the house where I grew up now with my records and everything. So the room that I listen to CHUM in is right across the hall from where I'm sitting right now.
Wow, how cool is that? You enjoyed that?
But Hamilton, I ended up in, of course, because when I ran away from home to join my first band, they were based out of Hamilton, of course.
Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, that was a band called the Loved Ones, which we can get to a little bit later. They actually figure into the Kinks story, of course.
All right.
But at the time, originally I couldn't get in the band. I was like their sound man, light man, / manager / roadie type thing.
Mhm.
And I was, let me see, halfway through my second year at York University trying to get a BFA, which is a Bachelor of Fuck All, as you know. And my...
Can we say that, Johnny?
Yep.
Oh, good, because there'll be some more swearing coming up, I'm sure.
Oh, boy.
But I went to my guidance person and said, look, I've got a chance to go on the road with this band. And he said, yeah, do it. You can always come back to school, but if you've got a chance to go on the road, do it. And that was 1976. And I've dropped out ever since. I never managed to get back to school.
Wow, so they asked you to leave.
Well, they said it's okay to leave and we'll let you come back, but I didn't need to.
Wow, very cool. So look,
Because the Pigpaper was starting right around then, too, so I was just too busy. I didn't have any time for stuff like university.
Of course not. I was just going to ask you about the Pigpapers. What was the start of all of that?
Well, the actual start was I printed up by hand and then on a typewriter using carbon paper for us really old people, these little things every week called Pig Productions Patented Pop Parades, and they were my top 10 of what I was listening to that week, and I would type them up and hand them out at school.
What year
I don't
was
know.
Like
What
chum
year was
charts
it?
of your own?
Exactly, and this would have been around 1970, 71, very early on.
Wow. So where did that moniker come from? Tell the people where Gary Pig came from. You're Gary Gold, as far as I know.
Yes, again, very logical. While I was in high school, which is the reason why I was in York University later, in high school I was a film major, or a film student, I guess, in high school. And I made a film about my hometown, which is Port Credit, Ontario, and it won a local film festival. And one of the judges was a stringer, I guess you would say, for the PBS affiliate in Buffalo, New York. And he wanted permission to show this film on, I think it was called Channel 17 in those days. Again, we're talking very early 70s. And my film instructor, because of some of the possibly litigious material in the film, said we have to credit the film to a fictitious director. You'd better take off your real name and come up with a pseudonym and we'll reshoot the credits. So the day we reshot the credits, I still hadn't come up with a name. I was eating Wheaties. This little round stamper came out of the bottom of the bag, and it was a little round pig logo, and that's my logo to this day.
Oh,
and I
man.
became Gary Pig.
Oh, that's how I thought it happened. No, I'm
Well,
just
of course,
kidding.
makes sense. But the
It
interesting
makes-
thing is, here's the lucky coincidence. 5 years later, when it's punk rock time, I already had my punk rock name, right?
Oh, there you go. And did you keep that little charm that was in the bottom of the box?
Yeah, well, you know me, of course. I still have it.
Is that where the logo came from?
Yeah, I still use it.
Oh, no kidding.
If you see the little pig shit logo, my column head, that's the same little stamp. And it appeared first on this film, and then it became, and then it went on my first columns. After the pop parades, I was actually writing record reviews and handing them out. And then I would send them to the local newspapers in Toronto, who all refused to print them. And a friend of mine who ran a record store said, you can do one of two things. You can just forget this nonsense and go back to school, or you can publish this stuff yourself. And that became the first pig paper in 1975, which was a fake program for a Who concert.
Oh, man.
Which we sold outside Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto until some guy came along and threatened to arrest us.
Oh, at the Who concert?
Yeah, I mean, we made it look like a real official program, and we were selling them outside for $1 a piece.
Now, that's smart thinking.
Well,
Excellent.
I learned that from, threatening to get sued by PBS, so.
Okay, and what happened with that? Did you get dragged off, or is that issue a real rarity? Did the police take it and enjoy it themselves?
Well, here's where it leads actually to the Kinks. The leftover issues we put in my friend's record store, and he started selling them. And he said, give me a few of them and give me your phone number, and I'll put them on sale for consignment. And I didn't know what that meant. And he
with
said...
a K. Consignment
exactly,
with a K.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And I got a phone call a few days later expecting him to say, you've got to get this stuff out of here. And he said, we've sold out. You better bring me some more. And I said, there are no more. And he said, you better make some more. So the next cool, with a K, band that came to Maple Leaf Gardens was the Kinks. So that became Pig Paper number 3 in, I think it was April 1977.
Yeah.
The Kinks issue was handed out at their show in Toronto, and the next night they played Buffalo, New York, and of course we followed them there. Because just to backtrack a little bit, the Kinks didn't come to Toronto between, I think it was 1969 and 1977. So we'd always have to go to Buffalo to see them, and for all of those things like the Preservation Tour and the Schoolboys and Disgrace Tour and the soap opera tours, we'd have to go to Buffalo to see them. And in the lobby of those theaters afterwards, that's where I met Greg Prevost, that's where I met Bernie Kugel of fanzine later, and so in a way, the Kinks always lead to good things. So.
Oh yeah, and the whole fanzine nation, Greg with Future and Bernie Kugel, of course, with Big Star.
Yes, you're
Absolutely.
right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So these were all the cultists who were hanging out in the Lowe's lobby after the Kinks shows, and we, of course, had no way of getting home that night, so we just had to hang around until the first bus back to Toronto in the morning. Yeah. So we would just end up at these people's houses overnight.
Wow. And did you meet the Kinks in those early days?
Yes, I did. Funny you should ask. The day after that 1977 show in Toronto, they played Buffalo, and the day after that, they did a record signing at the Record Theatre, and I took my pig papers to that, of course, and gave one to each of the Kinks. And Dave and Mick especially, were very, very interested in it. So I remember hanging around and talking to them about it until Ray sort of gave them the stink eye and said, come on, we're supposed to be signing records here. So... That would have been, that would have been the Sleepwalker tour.
Wow, that is so cool. Well, listen, we've got to ask you about this. When did you start getting into music yourself? In the middle of your young kinky years, you got into playing in bands and not just writing about groups and following groups, but actually getting into the making of music yourself. Tell us about that.
Well, I was very lucky that I grew up in a musical household. My dad was like an amateur drummer, big band type drummer. My mother, right up until she was in her 80s, was singing in the Mississauga Choral Society, so there was always records. So when records came along, they would be buying me records. I would get $1.45 for my allowance every week, for example, off the CHUM chart. And when, of course, the Beatles came along, you remember the Beatles, right?
I've heard of them.
Yeah, they're sort of a Mersey Beat type group.
Love those
and
guys.
They played Ed Sullivan, and we were all watching, and I didn't know who it was at the time, but I saw John Lennon, and I said, that's what I want to be. And the very next day after school, I had one of my dad's old tennis rackets, and that was my Rickenbacker, and it just led from there. And about a year later, my parents bought me a cheap acoustic guitar. And I just assumed every family was like this. You know, everyone got a guitar in 1965, and everyone put a band together a couple of years later.
Yeah.
But it was pretty radical in those days. I was also the first guy to get kicked out of school because I had long hair, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
I was trying to be Ilya Kuryakin, right? I had
course.
black turtlenecks. And so I had very cool parents, in other words. They wouldn't let them kick me out of school. And they bought me a guitar. And I remember when I got my first band together in 1968, 69-ish, my dad was going, how come you guys aren't rehearsing? If you're serious about this, you got to rehearse more often. So I was very, very lucky in that respect.
Wow, parents requesting you to make a racket? Interesting.
Yeah, and they didn't mind. You know, they didn't tell me to cut my hair, and they were cool. I have very cool parents.
So what kind
songs
of
were
material
you covering in the
doing?
band?
Ah, that's just what I was going to ask.
The very first band, we weren't doing any Kinks. We were doing In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, of course, because we could make it last for 2 hours. We're doing Summertime Blues, but we were doing the Blue Cheer version. And, you know, that's what we were doing then. But the Loved Ones, to skip up to the mid-'70s, that was a band that had She's Got Everything in their set.
All right.
So I was very proud to put that song in there.
Mm-hmm.
We did, Miriam, you'll appreciate this, we did Shake Some Action.
Wow, fantastic. See, that's what makes you Gary Pig, the great one.
Yeah.
Terrific. That's really, really great. And
I don't know who else would have been covering that in Toronto in 1977. You know, Shake Some Action.
Yeah, and that would have been right around the time that Teenagehead was getting together, right?
Well, they had actually been together actually a bit earlier than that. And the first time I saw Teenagehead, they were opening for Max Webster, believe it or not. And their set consisted, again, Ramones hadn't hit yet, right? Yeah. So they were doing stuff like Under My Wheels and a bit of Aerosmith, a bit of, you know, they were doing that kind of stuff. And then, you know, the Dolls came to Toronto, and then the first Ramones album, and then, of course, everything changed.
Yeah, and then they came to New York and really impressed everybody who was down here, that great Canadian band like that. Well, they came with the Diodes and a couple of other groups.
You should see, a little aside here, have you seen the documentary on Teenagehead that just came out?
No.
Yeah, go on YouTube. It's called Picture My Face. It's very, very good.
Ah, one of the best songs.
Yeah, absolutely. They were an amazing band. They were an amazing band.
Gord was a great guitar player. Still is, I imagine.
He still is, yeah. And I was about to say, I mean, he is one of my guitar idols. I would put him right up there with Dave Death of the Clown Davis. You know, Gord had not only his own style, but he had his own sound. He was absolutely brilliant. And he wrote a lot of those songs. Yeah. And I remember first interviewing him for the Pigpaper, assuming he was going to say Lennon-McCartney. And he said, no, I wasn't into the Beatles. I was into the Monkees.
Oh, wow.
So
interesting.
Doubly cool.
Yeah. So what was going on with you? You crisscrossed the nation with your 7-Eleven interviews, going from the East Coast, Toronto, to the West Coast, Vancouver. What ended up happening there? You had a group out there in Vancouver. You had Fun with Numbers there. At what point did you head back east?
Well, I originally went to California because I wanted to find Jan and Dean. So I ended up in California, and then that was when I put together another version of the Loved Ones. And we almost got signed to Pacific Arts, believe it or not. Mike Nesmith was just starting, you know, that label at the time.
Wow. Who else was
and
in
Rodney
the group?
Bingenheimer was playing our demos on K-Rock. So that was the beginning of what became known as the Paisley Underground scene. So Susanna Hoffs was hanging around because her boyfriend was Steve Wynn, who is a big fan of Simply Saucers, so it all connects.
Wow. And what about Greg
But
Shaw?
I got deported. I got thrown out of America. So the nearest Canadian city they could deport me to was Vancouver. So that's why I had to work at the 7-Eleven to get enough money to move back east.
Well.
So while I was there, I put that band together. But otherwise, I probably would have ended up still in California.
Well, wait. back up. I had two questions. One was, did Greg Shaw figure into your career at all while you were in LA?
Yeah, but even before that, I mean, he was subscribing to the Pig Paper.
Wow. Okay.
We're going way, way back. And I remember when he first came to town, you know, that's when I first physically laid eyes on him. That would have been around 77.
Yeah.
But again, I don't, just to be sort of humble here for a second, I don't consider I did anything particularly special or unique. And Miriam, I'm sure you can identify the same reason probably Kick started. It was just because we're waiting to read something cool and no one else is doing it, so let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah, and just trying to be in touch with other people. You know, you went from letter writing, you know, to getting writer's cramp, writing the same thing to the same two people.
And real cut and paste, actual literal cut and paste in those days.
Yeah. So,
but that's how we all met each other. That's
right.
You guys were writing to me, and Greg, you know, Greg and I were corresponding. Mm-hmm. So when I first went to LA, of course, I hooked up with Greg, and also I went to the Rhino Records store, and I remember going up to buy my first record there, and the guy behind the counter thought I had a weird accent, and I said, I'm actually from Canada. And he said, oh, one of my favorite records is from Canada, and that was She's a Dog, my first record on Pig Records, and that was Steve Wynn behind the counter.
No kidding. Wow.
So he was busy putting together what became Dream Syndicate, and his girlfriend was Susanna Hoffs, who was putting together what became the Bangs at the time.
Okay, so which of them got you deported?
I actually got myself deported, and because the Loved Ones were getting very, very popular. And we were playing house parties. We gave kickbacks to the Huntington Beach police, you know, so they wouldn't bust us. And a lot of nefarious things were going on at these parties. If you've ever seen Fast Times at Ridgemount High, that was the life that the Loved Ones were living at that time in California.
Wow. Who else was in the Loved Ones?
Something happened at one of these parties, and they said, who's responsible? And, of course, everyone points to the band. And the other three guys pointed to me because it was my band. And they hauled me off to the police station. They said, you know, we can't keep covering for you guys anymore. You guys are getting in trouble. And by the way, we ran your papers, and you shouldn't even be living in this country, Gary.
Did you return to the wily world of 7-Eleven, or did you plan for an escape back to Toronto right off the bat?
Well, as soon as I had enough money from the 7-Eleven, I came back to Toronto. I wanted to get back together with my records. Mm-hmm. And I was, of course, getting ready to put together another version of The Loved Ones, so I put an ad in the papers. And The Loved Ones always, you had to be able to sing and harmonize, not just play, which is, again, why it was sometimes pretty difficult to, you know, find 3 or 4 other people who could sing and play and harmonize. Mm-hmm. So this man answered my ad in the Toronto Daily Star. This would have been very early or very late 1984, roughly. And he said, well, I'm putting a band together, and we need a vocal coach. So would you be interested in doing that? And so instead of working at the Toronto 7-Eleven, I was a vocal coach for a band which became Endless Summer, which was the authorized, meaning we had to license the name and everything from Brother Records in California, which was the Beach Boys.
Wow.
And we were the Canadian touring version of the Beach Boys. And we paid them a fee every year to do it. And I ended up in that band just, again, by accident, because they were saying, well, can you just play this gig? Can you just play this gig for us? Because you already know the material. And I ended up in that band for almost 5 years.
Wow.
Because, again, we became very, very popular because it's Beach Boys music, right?
Yeah.
But I have a question to you because in reading about you, there's a couple of mentions of you and Joe Strummer being acquaintances. So can you tell us a little about that meeting and his, I guess he had influenced you to keep writing, I guess is what.
Yeah, absolutely. One summer I worked at the post office and made an awful lot of money. So I went to England for 3 weeks, and the first night I went to see the Trogs, and that was at the Nashville, I believe it was. And the opening act was a band called the 101ers. And, of course, you know, I'd never heard of them. And the thing which impressed me was they started their set with Route 66, the Stones version. And during their set, they played a couple of songs, which were the same songs my band at the time called Martin and the E-Chords were playing. Martin, the guy I just mentioned, recorded that first Loved Ones rehearsal. Martin was our pretend lead singer in our pretend Martin and the E-Chords band. So I had to go up and talk to this guy before the trog started, and it turned out being Joe. And I said, I just got into town. I'm going to be here for another 3 weeks. I'm here to buy records and to see shows. And he said, well, my band is going to make a record, and that became Keys to Your Heart on Chiswick. The first 101 is 45. And he
with
said,
5-star rock and roll on the B-side.
Yes, indeed. And I had told him I didn't have them with me, of course, but I said, I just put out a magazine about The Who back in Toronto, and I'll mail you one if you give me your address. And I did, and he stayed in touch, and I guess it was about a year later, just as the Clash were forming, I guess, he sent the Keys to Your Heart. It was one of the first records I ever reviewed in one of the very early Pig Papers. I don't know if you guys have ever met him, but he was one of the great guys and a true rock and roll fan. And he told me, for example, while you're here for another 3 weeks, he told me places to go, and one of them was this shop at Land's End. And he said, there's a girl with selling clothes on one side of the store, but talk to the guy on the other side of the store. And of course, that was Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood. So that was their little shop.
A lot of discoveries in those days, eh?
Again, we were just fans. I mean, we were just wandering around the world looking for records and having fun.
Did he send you the single with the picture sleeve or without the picture sleeve?
I never got the picture sleeve until years later. Okay. You're right.
Yeah,
I just got the white sleeve.
It's hard to get, yeah.
It might have been something, I mean, it came from him, but it came from Chiswick, actually, the label.
Sure.
So they probably didn't want to waste the sleeve on me. Here's some trivia. The first Kinks album I ever got was this great compilation called Golden Hour of the Kinks.
Oh, yeah.
You must know that whole series. They did one on the Searchers, et cetera, et cetera. It was a great little series. So I got that album because it was basically the only one in print at the time in Canada.
Really?
And it's a cool compilation. It had sitting on my sofa on it and, all this cool stuff.
It was like overloaded. There was more music on those golden hours. There was a golden hour. That's an awful lot to pile on there. Very tight grooves and very interesting cover art, that's for sure.
Yeah, bad fidelity, right? Too much on each side. But
were those manufactured in Canada?
Yeah, once again, Pye pressed the equivalents of the British one. So, as I say, Pye and Scarborough made it very easy for us to keep up with the Kinks.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, however, the Lola album had just been deleted in Canada. So that was my second album, was the Lola versus Powerman album. And I remember bringing it home, and I didn't know why there was a hole in the cover, the drill hole.
Yeah.
And I filled it with white Elmer's glue.
This is how that kind of a thing to do. Those holes were always so bothersome.
Exactly, and I didn't know why it was there. I thought, someone put a hole in my record, so I filled the hole.
No,
so I guess that would have been my first official Kinks album, right? That would have been my first one, and to this day, it's still one of my favorites. And I think the box version just came out just recently.
Yes, it did, and we were thrilled to be taking a gander at that. There's lots of goodies on there, but with that Lola album, I mean, how quickly was that cut out? I didn't even know that it was cut out.
Well, we used to get the American deletes instantly.
Okay.
So that's why Toronto was one of the best places probably in the world to get records back then. Because you get all the 70s stuff from England, again, you would get overstocks and deletes from England and the stuff from the States. And they'd all end up dumped in Canada, and Paul Avery and the Raiders, Sandel's, all of these bands, I would be buying all of their records for 99 cents, all American cutouts.
Amazing. So, what about Percy? Percy came out in Canada, never made it out here in the States. That must have been a good thing.
Yes, you're right. Percy did come out in Canada. It was hard to find, though. That was the soundtrack, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It would have been the last Pye release. Yeah, that was even for Canada. That took me a few months to track down.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And something else, another amazing record. I found 99 cents in a Woolworths. Fortunately, because I was about to buy a Rod Stewart album instead, and I will admit that, but of course you should edit that part out, of course.
No, we don't need to do that. Same timing for Rod Stewart wouldn't be too bad. We're okay
No,
with that.
this was a later Rod Stewart record. This was Sing It Again, Rod, the greatest hits with the wine glass cover.
Okay, I think the phone call is going to be ended now.
I see, I told you.
Well, Gary, you're not the first person to mention Rod Stewart on Waterloo Underground, so you got that going for you.
Yeah, I hope I'm the last, though. But fortunately, my friend Doug, who became Rock Serling, a great pig paper writer, just as I was going up to the counter in Woolworths, he said, "Hey, Gary, have you got this?" And he handed me like a 99-cent delete of something else. So that was the end of Rod.
Wow, okay, well, that's quite a lot of adventures in record collecting them there with the Kinks. But Johnny here has an immense collection of Kinks records, 45s, albums, you name it, from all over the world. Johnny, are there a couple of rarities that you might want to mention that were Canadian releases of the Kinks that you're aware of?
Not really. I could just talk to the 45s from Canada. They were very plain. They didn't have any picture sleeves. They just had a red label and the Pi logo, and they were pretty plain. But they did have a couple of weird, odd pairings that you wouldn't find anywhere else from Canada. But do you have any of those old 45s from Canada?
Yeah, and you're right about the sleeves, because Canadians always got gypped. We didn't get picture sleeves. We didn't get inner sleeves on albums later. We didn't get the posters. I mean, a lot of that stuff never made it into the Canadian pressings.
So that just wasn't Pi, that was all the other record labels as well? Why is that?
Yeah, everyone did it. I remember getting Tommy, believe it or not, and inside was actually someone had photocopied, that little libretto that came inside. It was really, really like Bush League up here. Probably still is.
You made a couple of selections of some Kinks tunes. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what exactly was the deal with you loving Hardy Line? You used to sing this with your own band at one point in time.
Yeah, I sang that in my band in Vancouver. We were called Fun with Numbers. I ended up there in the mid-'80s for a while when I wasn't night managing the local 7-Eleven. I was actually auditioning people in the 7-Eleven at night to be in my band because, of course, the 7-Eleven was empty. So that's a whole other story. But I wanted to do Partyline because, if I'm not mistaken, that's the first song on Face to Face, right?
Johnny, is it? Yeah.
Yes, correct, yes.
We have affirmation from Johnny, right. So I always loved that song, and we did it in Fun with Numbers, and I've always liked that song.
So obviously Dave does the vocals on Partyline. Talk a little bit about Dave. What are your feelings about Dave's songs, and just Dave in general? I know in that pig paper, Dave's hair is mentioned, and that seems to be a theme that a lot of our guests on Waterloo Underground like to talk about Dave's hair. But tell us about your feelings about Dave.
Dave is Dave Death the Clown Davis. There's no one like him. There never will be. That could be a good thing. But Dave was at least 50% of the Kinks, at least. Because as you say, back in the early olden days, we would take a look at that hair, and this was before anyone, at least me, had ever seen a picture of the Pretty Things, for example, and it was just amazing to see someone with hair like that. And then by the time we get to Death of a Clown, we're going, look at those clothes, where did he get that jacket? And then, speaking of the Lola album with the Elmer's Glue Hole, those songs, Dave's songs on there, I was a kind of geeky guy. I'd actually look at the label to see who wrote the songs. And it turned out my favorite songs on those albums on any given day are usually Dave's. And Suzanne is Still Alive, Mindless Child of Motherhood. Dave, it's complicated with 2 Ks. I'm sure if there were no Kinks, or if he had gone off to start his own band, we would be speaking about him in even more revered or reverential tones.
Right.
Of course, when you're alongside someone like Ray, who's like so prolific and so everything else, you got to sort of worm your way in there, like Harrison with the Beatles, right? But Dave, like George Harrison, if it hadn't been for those other guys, these guys would have led and written for and been amazing people all on their own.
Yeah, okay. Tell us about some more Kinks tunes that you dig.
Well, that would have been my third favorite. We can go 3, 2, 1 if you'd like.
Okay. Let's do that.
My second was Big Black Smoke, which I didn't discover until I got Chronicles. And that song is not only one of my favorite Kinks songs, it's one of my favorite songs, period. I mean, that is a brilliant song, an amazing arrangement, a great production. There's nothing wrong with that song. It's just wonderful. Waterloo, Sunset, blah, blah, blah. I always go, well, what about Big Black Smoke?
Yeah. And it's got such a great storyline to it, and really a warning to young women.
Exactly.
Following somebody else's voice into the big city. Yeah.
But, that's an amazing, amazing song.
Absolutely is. And your number one?
Number one was Berkeleymews.
Oh, wow.
Which in Canada, Johnny, you can correct me, it was the B-side of Lola in Canada.
Yes, most of the world, actually. I think in the U.S. and maybe a couple other places, it was Mindless Child of Motherhood. But everywhere else, it was Berkeleymews.
Yeah, I love that song because of the line about the shitty dining room, which everyone tells me it's chilly dining room. No, it's shitty dining room.
Agreed.
So for that line alone, that's my favorite Kinks song.
Petequaife was living in Southern Ontario for a long time. Was there any time that you crossed paths with him?
No, because during those years I was living in the States, and he was in Belleville, I believe, which is where my aunt was. I actually spent my summers in Belleville as a little kid. Mm-hmm. So Pete was, all good British guys end up in Canada sooner or later. So, Terry Sylvester ended up here, right? I think he's in Florida now. But there were a lot of British invaders, floating around my neighborhood, in the 80s, 90s. But I was long gone by then again, so I never crossed paths.
Would you mind reading a little bit from that pig paper number 3 about the Kinks?
The pig paper number 3 about the Kinks was an interview with Edgar Bro from Simply Saucer. And the reason I got involved with him was because we were waiting for the Kinks to play at Lowe's in Buffalo in 76. And someone told us, it might have been Bernie Kugel, someone told us, go around to the alley behind the theater, and that's where the Kinks will eventually show up. And sure enough, they did. And Edgar jumped on Ray's back and, just clung onto Ray's back and then slowly slid down to the ground. And that's when I met Edgar.
So Edgar wrote...
Edgar Bro was interviewed for the third pig paper. That was going to be a full issue. So it was going to be like a full issue full of Kinks interviews with various Kinks fans. But the Ramones came along instead, and I started writing about them. And now there's new music to write about, right? Instead of our favorites from yesteryear.
Right.
So all that managed to come out of that was Edgar's interview, which was only a 2-sided pig paper, a literal pig paper, because we needed to get it out in time for their concert so we could hand it out at the concert.
So that's what you handed out at the concert?
Yeah, and again the following night in Buffalo, and the next day at the record theater at the record signing.
So Gary, give us a reading from that incredible issue of the pig papers that focused on the Kinks. Let's hear it.
All right. Pig paper number 3, April 1977, as handed out at the Kinks concerts in Toronto and Buffalo. And I'm quoting from Edgar Bro from Simply Saucer, who says, "There are a lot of people in Hamilton who think of me every time they hear about the Kinks. I turned on all my friends to them. It's like propaganda. It's a conspiracy with a K." He actually said the with a K. I was the first one in Hamilton to get their records. My sister bought a well-respected man, and I stole it off her. She was a Stones freak. I was a Kinks freak. The feeling of hearing those songs for the first time and what they did to me, it was like an electric shock, just as if I'd been plugged into a socket. Songs like Tired of Waiting for You are immortal classics. The early Kinks were just beautiful. Raydavies' voice was what hooked me in the very beginning. Just that voice, there was something strange about it. I'd never heard anybody sing like that. I remember camping out when I first heard Days on the radio. They didn't say who it was, but I just heard that voice and I knew it was the Kinks. I jumped up and into the swimming pool. I'd play it 10 times in a row and just march around my room like a tin soldier. Those old days were great because you could get Kinks albums for 99 cents. I used to go to the record store and look at the back cover of something else because I couldn't afford to buy it.
Gary, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and we're really all excited about having you on and speaking about your involvement with the Kinks as a Kinks fanatic and someone who was up there in the Great White North and being inspired by their great music and all your great antics and adventures and so on. We hope to have you back as soon as you can possibly dig up some more issues of those big papers to read from.
I got piles of them sitting around here. It's just a matter of, find them. And I actually have a contractor coming in to build me some shelves because I got to get this stuff out of the boxes so I can see what I have here.
Good idea.
Yes, which I'm glad to be back in my original house because I am discovering stuff. That's that Pig Paper number 4, the unpublished issue. I just came across that 2 days ago.
Yeah.
I thought that was long gone.
Well, speaking of the bottom of the box, you did find your logo at the bottom of that cereal box. And you still have it, so...
Remember they made you eat the whole box so you could get to the prize at the bottom, right? So.
Yeah, like with Cracker Jacks,
Yeah, but I had a big cake baking bowl of my grandmother's, so I used to empty the cereal out first.
Wow. Hey, do they still make
Yeah,
Smudge
just shove
toffee
your
up
dirty
there?
arm through the whole box.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard getting the cereal back in the box. You remember that? Because by then, if you empty a cereal box into a bowl and then try to get it back, for some reason you can never get all the cereal back in the same box.
Well, we'll keep you away from our cereal boxes next time you come over here. Okay. All right, Gary. Keep on keeping on, and please keep us posted with all of your doings, and stay tuned to all of the action at Waterloo Underground.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Gary.
Great.
I'm going to go
Thanks,
listen to
Gary.
some Kinks now.
Okay, good. Us too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
There you go, Waterloo Undergrounders, and bye-bye, Gary Pig. It was been great having you as a guest here on the show. Stay tuned for more conversations with Kinksters, so it's all K's all the way. And let's go, Kinks Reunion. WaterlooUnderground.com. Here for you and us, the Lou. For you.